Hi guys! So today I'm showing you how to make this crazy ruffly skirt. A few years ago I made a skirt very similar to this one and vlogged about it, and to this day that is still one of my most frequently viewed and shared posts. So I thought I would make a video tutorial and show you the process and walk you through all the steps in case you want to make one. For this project you will need pins, scissors, large sheets of paper, marking pens, a sewing machine, needles, matching thread, and a ruler. All the usual stuff. You will also need several yards of a non-stretch fabric. I'm using a thick brocade, a little bit of lining in a matching color, some fusible interfacing for the waistband, and a zipper. But the magic material which gives this skirt its shape is something called horsehair braid. It's a stiff yet flexible polyester mesh that is usually sold as a by-the-yard trim. Make sure you buy horsehair that is at least 1 inch wide for this project, otherwise it won't create the amount of volume that we need. Before we get into the drafting and construction of this skirt, here's a breakdown of the pattern we'll be making. The top of the skirt consists of a 3-piece waistband, and the bottom is 3 circle skirts sewn together with horsehair stitched into the hem. You can make this skirt with whatever waistband you like, but I'm making mine very wide and slightly rounded so the volume will begin at my hip, not my waist. To make a similar waistband, you have to start by measuring from your waistline down to the point you want the volume of the skirt to begin. Do this at the center front of your body, the sides, and the back. Write down the measurements you've chosen so you don't forget them. I chose to make my waistband longer at the front and back and slightly shorter at the sides. This will make the skirt hang an inch lower at the front and back, which creates a slightly rounded hem. You will also need to measure around your waist and around your hips so you know how big the waistband needs to be. And when that's done, measure down from the end point of the waistband to where you want the skirt to end. This measurement is necessary for drafting the circle skirt pattern. Now on to drafting. To draft a circle skirt, find the radius of your waist measurement. You can do this by dividing your waist measurement by 3.14, then dividing the result by 2. For this project, you actually want the circle skirts to be larger than your waist measurement, so add 2 or 3 inches onto your waist radius. Fold a large sheet of paper in half and make sure the folded edge is straight and that you have a 90-degree angle to work off of. Measure away from the corner of the paper with a ruler and draw tick marks every few millimeters. Once connected, these should create a curved line. The distance between the corner of the paper and this line needs to be the same as your waist radius, plus those extra few inches that I mentioned earlier. Now add your waist radius, plus the extra few inches, the length you want the skirt to be, and the seam allowances together. For me, that involved adding 6 inches, 11.5 inches, and 1.5 inches together. Your measurements might be different depending on the length you want and the waist size you have. But no matter your skirt size, the seam allowance you need will be the same, and that's 1.5 inches. Now use your ruler and measure away from the corner of the paper. This time you're marking where the hem of the skirt will be. The number we just added up is how far away these tick marks should be from the corner of the paper. Now go ahead and cut the skirt pattern out. Now we can draft the waistband. To do this, start by dividing your waist and hip measurement by 4. Then make a line that slants downward. This line needs to be the same length as your quarter waist measurement, and you want this line to go outward from a straight edge. Then round the line out a bit so it has a more gentle curve. From the end of the curved line, measure down and out so you have a straight slanted line. The length of this line should be how long you wanted the waistband to be at the side of the skirt. The distance between the end of this line and the straight edge of the paper needs to be the same as your 1/4 hip measurement. Then draw a curved line that connects to the straight edge. Make sure the distance between the 2 curved lines is the same as the width you wanted the waistband to have. Add 1/2 inch seam allowances to the edges and label the pieces, then cut it out. I repeated this process to create the pattern for the back half of the waistband. I just made it a little wider. Also, if you're worried it might be too small, you can leave larger seam allowances at the sides and let it out if need be. Now it's time to finally begin work with the fabric. We'll start by cutting out the bottom of the skirt. For this part, you will need to cut out 3 full circle skirts or 6 half circle skirts. If you can, line the straight edges of the pattern against a folded edge of the fabric. This way you can cut out a full circle skirt as one piece. If your fabric isn't wide enough and that isn't an option, you can cut out 2 half circles and sew them together. It really won't make a difference. Once you have your pattern pinned in place, go ahead and cut out the pieces. If you're cutting them on a folded edge, make sure to also cut a straight line from the hem of the skirt to the waist. You need an opening in the skirt somewhere since it has to be sewn to the other skirt pieces. Once the skirts are cut out, hang them over something and leave them overnight. Since circle skirts are cut on the fabric's bias, the hem can warp over time and end up being uneven. Leaving them to hang for 12 to 48 hours will force them to warp. Then we'll trim the hem so it's even before assembly. In the meantime, we'll work on the waistband. Line the straight edge of the pattern you drafted for the front half of the waistband against a folded edge of your fabric. Pin that in place along with the pattern for the back half of the waistband. The back half is not cut on a fold, you want it to be two separate pieces. Then go ahead and cut them out. Lay the waistband pieces out flat on top of a lightweight fusible interfacing. Make sure the side of the interfacing that has glue is against the wrong side of your fabric. Then cut around the pieces. Using your waistband pattern as a guide, cut out the lining layer for the waistband. Iron the interfacing onto the pieces, then pin the pieces together with the wrong sides facing each other so you can sew up the side seams. And pin the lining pieces together in the same way. Now sew up the seams you just pinned. I drafted my waistband with 1/2 inch seam allowances, so I'm stitching a 1/2 inch away from the raw edge of the material. And I'm doing this to the top layer of the waistband and the lining. Once you finish this step, I'd suggest trying the waistband on and making sure it fits comfortably. If it fits, then iron the seams open so they lay flat. Turn the lower edge of the waistband under by a 1/2 inch. You can secure this with a basting stitch if you want, but I'm just pinning it in place. You just want to temporarily keep this edge turned over, which is why we aren't sewing it. Lay the top layer of the waistband against the lining so the right sides are facing each other. Then pin around the top edge and the sides. Sew the lining and the top layer of the waistband together, but only sew around the top and side edges. You want the bottom to be left open. Trim the seam allowance off at the corners so there isn't excess material there. Then turn the waistband the right way out and use something sharp to make sure all the corners are crisp and pointy. Pin around the top and side edges of the waistband. When doing this, make sure the lining isn't visible from the top side of the waistband. And once this is done, we are going to switch back to working on the skirt. After they've stretched overnight, lay your circle skirts out flat. Place your pattern over top of them and trim any fabric that goes beyond the edges of the pattern. You want every circle to be the same length all the way around. Now sew the circles and half circles together with the wrong sides of the fabric facing each other. Once again, I'm doing this with 1/2 inch seam allowances. When they are all sewn together, trim the raw edges down to maybe 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch. This is kind of hard to explain, but make sure the raw edges of the fabric are facing up. Then fold the fabric so the right sides are facing each other. This should hide the raw edges. Now pin across this point to make sure the raw edges stay hidden. And of course, repeat this process with every seam. If this looks familiar, that's probably because this is the process of creating French seams, and it's much easier to show than it is to explain, so I'll just be quiet now. Stitch a 1/2 inch away from the now folded edges. If you've done everything right, the raw edge you trimmed earlier should be hidden between these layers of fabric. When this is done, all 3 circles should be sewn together into one huge length of fabric. Now get out your horsehair braid and pin it to the hem of the circle skirts you just sewed together. You want the edge of the horsehair to line up with the bottom edge of the skirt, and you should be pinning this to the right side of your fabric. Make sure you aren't stretching the horsehair braid or the material when you're doing this. If you do, you won't end up with a very pretty hem. Now sew the horsehair braid on with a running stitch and a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you're using a fresh ballpoint needle for this, since it's less likely to catch on the horsehair. When that's done, fold the horsehair over twice so it's against the wrong side of your fabric. It should look a little like this. And pin it in place once again. There is a lot of pinning involved in this, but if you skip the pinning, you will end up with a ripply hem, which you really don't want. Now it's time for more sewing. Try to keep your stitching even and about a ½ inch away from the edge of the hem. When you turn the horsehair inward, the lower ½ inch should be covered in fabric. This can be a really good guide for your stitching. And that's pretty much it. Attaching horsehair into a skirt is really easy, even if it is kind of time consuming. Now gather the top of your skirt down. You want it to match the measurement of the lower edge of your waistband, which for me was about 37 inches. I'm doing this by hand with small running stitches that I'm pulling tightly as I go, but you can do it by machine or however you prefer. Tuck the gathered edge of your skirt between the top waistband layer and the lining. This edge should be hidden between them. I lost the footage of me pinning it, but here it is when I was finished. Stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the lower edge of the waistband. This should secure the skirt portion onto the waistband. The skirt is pretty tightly gathered, so you're going to be sewing through a lot of layers of fabric. Going slowly is usually best at times like this. And once the skirt is attached, you can top stitch around the other edges of the waistband. Now it's time to sculpt the crazy ruffliness. The skirt should take on this shape naturally as you play with it, so there isn't a super technical way to describe this process. I basically picked up 10 or 12 inches of the hem and pinched it together. Then I placed a pin where I'd pinched the fabric. The pin should only go through 2 layers of fabric. If it goes through more, then your skirt will lack movement. It doesn't look like much at first. Just keep going and even things out as you go, and it should eventually start to take shape. This process will be easier if you're using a wider horsehair braid. It'll also be way easier if you have someone willing to hold or wear the skirt while you do this. Now tack the skirt wherever the pins were. I tack things with a regular hand sewing needle and 2 strands of thread. I tie a knot at one end of the thread, poke the needle through the fabric, and sew several small stitches. Then I tie the thread off, snip it, and repeat. This is kind of time consuming, but I promise you get faster at this the more you practice. And here it is when I was finished with all the tacking stitches. It still has a lot of movement, but it keeps its shape. Sew up the bottom half of the back seam with the French seam, so there aren't any raw edges. Then pin an invisible zipper in place and sew it in. And that's it! Your skirt is done and it should be super frilly and cute and wonderful. I hope this video was helpful and that you enjoyed it. I'll try and leave some extra info in the description box along with a link to pictures of my finished skirt. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it and I hope you will stick around for more videos on sewing and ruffly things.